Oh, blimey. Okay, so I feel like trigger warnings is one of those hot button topics where I'm almost more sick of the debate than I am of actual trigger warnings. I feel like it doesn't need to be as much of a subject that makes people cross as it does. So I just wondered that if by perhaps talking about it or getting people to say what they think in the comments might help me come to some conclusion, because I'm just going to be honest and throw it out there. I don't know. So I've had a couple of abusive exes, and so I'm just letting you know so that you know I'm not just going into this thing in a kind of, oh, everyone should shut up and not bother with trigger warnings, they're awful and terrible kind of thing. It's just as a disclaimer. Okay, so I'll start with a little personal story. For one reason or another, myself and a relative of mine who has very severe mental illness don't speak to each other. It's a very thorny subject with me. But there used to be these things called video shops. And I would refuse to look at the back of them because I didn't want to have what was going to happen in the film spoiled. And they had those little content warnings on the back saying warning contains, etc., etc. So I rented this film, got back, watched it, and had a terrible panic attack. It lasted all day, and I was really like hit somewhere deep in here. And you will laugh, but it was Lars and the real girl. And when I realised what it was really about, I turned the back of the DVD and it actually had, there right in print, warning contains mental illness. And would I have watched it if I had known that? I don't know. But part of me is kind of glad that I did watch it because it's actually a really sweet film. However, the fact of the matter is, yes, I did have a terrible panic attack because this was totally unexpected, and that's what it was about. So there's many things changing in the world. There are many more people speaking out about things. There are many more people having their points of view heard, and we've got a very long history of telling people, certain people, just be quiet, you're being silly, your opinions don't matter. Obviously paraphrasing there sometimes. This is starting to change, and I feel like this is possibly one of the reasons why it's becoming such a thing at the moment. There are people who are saying, I'm kind of tired of being brushed under the carpet. I want people to respect, respect me and respect the things that have brought me here as a person. And there are people with genuine PTSD out there. And how can you say to a person with PTSD, stop whinging, you're being silly? If people want big, major things highlighted, I find it hard to say, no, just go through the PTSD. It's one of those things that I, as someone who doesn't suffer from it, don't feel like I can say, I'll quit moaning. It's difficult because when it comes to art and when it comes to writing and things like that, I am genuinely confused. I personally don't want to have certain parts of the story ruined for me. I feel like if you're going to write a really hard-hitting novel with certain things in it, then perhaps you'll feel like the message will be lost if people aren't shocked when they read it. But it's also equally true that there are some people who, when they find themselves experiencing or reading or watching certain things, they won't be able to function properly after they accidentally fall into this thing that they didn't mean to go into. On the other hand, in her book Bad Feminist, Roxane Gay does talk about trigger warnings. I'm a big fan of her. She's very principled and she's also very nuanced, which I think is really good. And it says here, every so often, debates about trigger warnings flare hotly and both sides are resolute. Trigger warnings are either ineffective and impractical or vital for creating safe online spaces. It has been suggested more than once that if you don't believe in trigger warnings, you aren't respecting the experiences of rape and abuse survivors. It has been suggested more than once that trigger warnings are unnecessary coddling. It is an impossible debate. There is too much history lurking beneath the skin of too many people. Few are willing to consider the possibility that trigger warnings might be ineffective, impractical, and necessary for creating safe spaces all at once. The illusion of safety is as frustrating as it is powerful. There are things that rip my skin open and reveal what lies beneath, but I don't believe in trigger warnings. I don't believe people can be protected from their histories. I don't believe it is at all possible to anticipate the histories of others. Essentially, she goes on to say that she's seen trigger warnings for such a variety of things that where do you stop? So she herself is a rape survivor, and she doesn't like it when people say that when she writes about rape it should have a trigger warning on it. That's really making it simplistic, but essentially that's what she's saying. So to further on from that, here's another little personal story. As I mentioned before, I had an abusive ex, and I sat down to watch a documentary about co-writer of Rick and Morty, Dan Harmon, called Harmontown. It was very funny, I enjoyed it, but it also gave me a panic attack, which I still wake up sometimes in the night, suffering from it, which is totally ridiculous. How on earth could you get a panic attack from a documentary about the co-writer of Rick and Morty? I'm not joking, that guy's an asshole. He's so abusive to his girlfriend, and his behaviour was identical to my ex, who tried to strangle me. I'm not saying that's what he does. I mean, you didn't see him be physically violent in the documentary or anything like that at all, but I'm sorry, his behaviour towards her was terrible. It awakened a lot of things inside me. And how do you trigger warning that? I guess you could say warning contains arsehole. I have anxiety and certain things will set me off, and many of them are nonsensical. They're not even about big traumatic things. They're just nonsensical. I was on a panel at Bizarrocon about weird writers not getting stuck in their social media echo chambers, and also how do you manage to write weird in such a weird world. And one of the other panelists, by the way, I'm linking this video down in the description because I feel like it's really relevant. One of the panelists said that some of his students will be faced with a certain subject in a book that they're studying and just walk out. And he said something that I thought was really interesting. He said, you can't tell people that that isn't how they're feeling and that they shouldn't feel that way. If someone feels like something has really been traumatizing for them, you can't then tell them, don't be silly, no it didn't. Just accept that that is how they feel. They're telling you that's how they feel. And perhaps you can have a calm conversation in which you listen to the other person and you get how they feel the subject could be approached, and then work from there. And in that sense, you're not just saying, let's not study this at all, or just saying, oh, don't be stupid, just get back in that classroom, because you're going to be met with more opposition in that sense. So people who do feel that there need to be trigger warnings, perhaps it's necessary to say, okay, you feel there's trigger warnings necessary, I'll do what I can. I think if it gets to the point where people are wanting trigger warnings for Piers Morgan or Katie Hopkins, then maybe it is getting a little bit silly, although God, I really hate Katie Hopkins. So I'm willing to accept that maybe they should be a thing. Maybe we could, go with trigger warnings for people. They do appear a lot anyway, and the world hasn't collapsed. I mean, it would be great if you could have trigger warnings that you opt in or out from, like do you want to see the trigger warnings, click this button here. How would we do that? I don't know, but we live in the future now, so perhaps that's the thing that could happen. I don't know. So basically I realised this was a load of old waffle, but in order for some people to just not discuss things altogether, or not read things altogether, or not watch things altogether, perhaps put the trigger warnings, because I know if I see trigger warnings, I'm more likely to read it anyway, so that's how that affects me. And if someone is feeling particularly brave, maybe they'll give it a go, I don't know. Or perhaps the world will just collapse in a pile of arguments. Who knows? Okay, so yeah, sorry about this. I don't really know what this was. Okay, cheers.